Hello, happy Halloween or belated Halloween. This is gonna be my first monthly reading wrap up, and I'm pretty excited to share all the books that I've read this month because I think it ended up being a pretty good reading month. It started off a little bit slow while I was on vacation still. I didn't read very much that one week, but somehow I caught up and I read 7 books this month. My goal for the year is to read 100 books, so in November and December I need to read 8 and then 9 books. So I don't know if I can totally do that because 7 even felt like kind of a lot. It was a little bit of a busy month, but we'll see. I've been setting my goal kind of low, like at 80 books or so the last couple of years, but I've been able to reach that and kind of surpass that. So then I would when I see that I'm more than halfway through that, I end up changing my goal to 100. And so I did that, I think, earlier this summer, but my reading has slowed down a bit since pre-summer. Anyway, let's get into it. These are the books that I read this last month of October. First book is The Islands by Dionne Irving, and I've talked about this in 1 or 2 other videos, so I won't go on with it too much here. The book was shortlisted for the Giller Prize, and it is a short story collection featuring mostly Jamaican women living abroad in parts of North America or Europe, and just the various experiences they have, of course, and the sort of longing there is for home, for family, close relationships and connections. I think those are pretty broad themes around this book. I really enjoyed it. It was a good short story collection. There were quite a lot of stories I liked. I really liked the variety in the stories and the sort of uniqueness despite having very similar themes in them. I thought there were a lot of great stories in here. Next I read Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. This is a book I read with my local book club. This is the first science fiction book we read, and I didn't even realize it was science fiction until I was looking for it at the library. I was looking in the general fiction section because I knew my local branch had it, but I couldn't find, so I ended up having to ask a librarian for help, and she leads me to the science fiction section. I was like, oh, interesting. I had no idea what this was about. This story follows a bunch of different characters connected through one major event across large portions of time, starting in I think 1914 or maybe even a little bit before that, going all the way to the year 2200, if not 2400. And this book was pretty good for most of my time reading it. Then it asked this one question and I'm like, holy shit, this is really good. I'm really intrigued to see where this goes. And then the ending underwhelmed me a little bit. I didn't hate it. And I feel like the question that was asked was answered, and I did like the answer. I guess there was just something a little unexpected about the ending that, I don't know, I expected something more. It was also a pretty short book. It introduced a lot of characters, and I wish it delved more deeply into a lot of these character stories. I feel like I didn't get to know a lot of them, except for 1, maybe 2. But overall, it's discussions on humanity, the meaning of life, relationships, and kind of what we choose to make important in our lives was very interesting and very sweet to me. It was just a nice feel-good book that you wouldn't necessarily expect to be that way, and I liked that sort of element in science fiction. I'd heard a lot about her books, but I hadn't read any of them until this point, but I might check another one out because it does feature some other characters that were in this book that I feel were underutilized, so I'm hoping to learn more about them. And I finished On the Nature of Things by Lucretius. I talked about this one a little bit in my Greece travel vlog because I was reading it at the time, but I didn't finish it before I finished the vlog. I mentioned that this is a book a friend recommended to me after he watched my video on death and dying and kind of knows about my fear of death, and I think kind of hoped this might be helpful or at least interesting to me. It was definitely interesting. I don't know that it was helpful. Lucretius was a Roman poet, I guess not exactly philosopher, but he does follow the Epicurean philosophy very closely and notes its ideas in his poem. For those unaware, myself included, prior to reading this, Epicureanism is a philosophy created by Epicurus in, I have to look this up, 307 BCE. It's a materialist and kind of skeptic philosophy. The skepticism is largely surrounding religion or kind of deities and their sort of divine interventions. Epicureanism declares that pleasure should be the main goal of life. However, it is not a hedonistic philosophy. It kind of talks about just trying to get away from pain and fear, but not necessarily leading a lavish lifestyle, just a comfortable one. And since a lot of fear might come from the unknown of what will happen after death, of divine intervention, of the god's cruelty, Epicureanism and the writing of Lucretius tries to convince us that, well, we don't need to worry about that because these things, we should be skeptic about these things. These things maybe don't exist, and we shouldn't worry about what happens after we die because there is no heaven and there is no hell. So this poem really goes into a sort of materialist philosophy and tries to convince us how life is made, how the earth was made, and all these sort of natural things how they occur in a very scientific sort of way. And obviously it's before the time of what we consider modern science, but there were a lot of things that Lucretius got right, and I was really surprised, like talking about atoms and certain other things that I was just like, whoa, people kind of had an idea about this so long ago. I had no idea. This also wasn't as difficult to read as I thought it would be. I was really scared I just like wouldn't get it. I don't read a lot of like classics, especially nothing this old. I don't read a lot of poetry of like any generation, so I was really worried I wouldn't get it. But there's a good introduction. The translator does make a lot of like good notes. So yeah, it wasn't that hard to read, but I don't know how it helped me with my fear of death, because my fear of death is that I don't think that there's anything after we die, and so that's why I'm scared. I might feel better knowing that there was some sort of deity, but I don't know that I believe in that at this time. However, I'm really glad I read this nonetheless. I've been thinking about it for a while, and I finally thought it's time. I also read Palestine, A Socialist Introduction, and this is sort of a collection of different writings, essays by many different authors, but it's edited by Sumaya Awad and Brian Bean. There are a lot of books on Palestine that I've been trying to read for a while. I read a few good ones earlier this year as well, and a friend had recommended this one to me, mostly the first part. He wasn't a huge fan of some of the later writings, but said that the first part of it was quite good, and so I was curious to check it out. I think it is not a bad introduction to the conflict in Palestine, to a bit of the history of Palestine, but I don't know if it's the primary book I would recommend to people when trying to look more into issues around Palestine. However, I do agree the first few chapters are very good. The later ones do try to make like connections between issues in the West and Palestine, or how there can be sort of greater solidarity, which I didn't dislike, but I think it would have been more interesting to focus as an introduction just on the Palestinian conflict. However, I did appreciate like the chapter on feminism that talked about how some Western feminists during like the Women's March and even before that were trying to kind of silence some Palestinian feminists as well. And I hadn't been aware of that previously, so that was interesting to know about. But I also wish to have read a little bit more about Palestinian women in the resistance, and there were some mentions for sure, but I think that chapter was a little underutilized. I also felt that some of the authors, not all of them, put a little bit too much faith in some of the sort of more leftist-leaning Democratic nominees at the time. This was written in 2020, and I understand the urge to do that, but unfortunately I think we have been shown that most people in the Democratic Party are not as interested in workers' rights or Palestinian rights. Yeah, not the first book I would recommend if you want an introduction to the Palestinian conflict. I would say the 100 Years' War on Palestine by Rashid Khalidi is maybe a better one, as well as The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine by Ilan Pappé. But there's a lot I haven't read. These are just two I've read earlier this year, and there's not that much more I've read, so I'm hoping to read a lot more on this topic. I read another book shortlisted for the Giller Prize, Study for Obedience by Sarah Bernstein. And this is maybe like the most vague book I've read in so long. I do enjoy a lot of kind of weirder literary fiction that doesn't necessarily follow certain common literary rules, with a lot of unreliable narrators, with a kind of very vague ending, and you're not totally sure what happened, but this one might have been a little bit too much for me. But I did appreciate what it was doing, so it felt I didn't want to rate it too low. This does have a pretty low rating on Goodreads. And yeah, I really liked the writing style, and I kind of liked not being sure, but once it came to the end and I still wasn't sure about a lot of things, I was like, I wish some things were a little bit more clear. This book follows a woman who moves in with her brother in a country that their ancestors had lived in, but she's not familiar with the language. She kind of becomes a housekeeper to him, and a lot of the townspeople become very suspicious of her. There are a lot of events that happen since she moves in, mostly with a lot of animal death and some other unfortunate instances of animals getting sick or dying, as well as a potato blight. And she just kind of mentions some of these a little bit like, oh, and then this happened and this happened. And you're kind of left wondering like what exactly is happening. There's a lot this book is saying underneath all these layers about anti-Semitism and xenophobia. But this narrator is also quite unlikable, at least in my view. However, I had watched some reviews of this book because I was really curious to see what other people thought. And I don't think a lot of people found her necessarily likable or relatable in any way, but things do take a somewhat clear turn in one aspect of her life. And I did kind of appreciate that sort of turn, like how obedience can become a sort of power as well. And yeah, I don't want to say more because I don't want to spoil what's like little slightly clear about this book. I'm glad I read it, I am, but I do wish some things had been a bit more clear for me. Sometimes I walk away from these books and I'm like, was I meant to get that, or am I just like not smart enough for this book? Then I read Peel Me a Lotus by Charmian Clift, And this is one of the books I bought on Hydra while I was on vacation, and I really loved this one. This is about the author's almost full year of living on Hydra. She ended up living there for almost a decade, but this is just the first year of it, her husband and her 3 kids, and kind of the adjustments that had to be made as they moved to Greece from, I believe it was London. I really loved this author's writing style. I think she just wrote things so beautifully. The descriptions of all these places, some of which I recognized, was just so wonderful to read through. I don't think this is a book I would have picked up if I hadn't been on Hydra, and I don't know that it would necessarily appeal to people who don't know much about it, at least initially, because I think if you read it you might be like, wow, this is really beautiful. But part of the specialness of it for me was just that I'd been in some of these places. This book was written in the 50s, so I'm sure a lot of the places don't exist anymore or are changed, but I still had a bit of a recognition when she mentioned some things. This edition also has really beautiful drawings in it that were made actually by one of her friends also living on this island. Yeah, I just want to read more about this island and people's experiences on it because it makes me so happy. It's so beautiful, and I know it wasn't like an easy life for this author in particular, or anyone necessarily living there. I definitely have like a slightly romanticized version of this island, having only been a tourist for a short amount of time there. I don't know that I could actually live there, but I don't know, it's still a special place for me, and very happy that it was like captured in this beautiful way in this book. And lastly, I just finished this book, Birnam Wood by Eleanor Catton. This is another shortlisted book for the Giller Prize, and I only have one more shortlisted book to read after this, so I'm very excited about that. I'm definitely gonna get it done before the prize is announced mid-November. This book deserves a video of its own, I think. This was such a journey. This is about a guerrilla gardening, sort of like anarchist gardening collective, and they just plant things kind of illegally, like where people don't know that they planted on other people's properties, public properties. And yeah, they cultivate it, they use it amongst themselves, they do sell it. However, they do not make a lot of money from this. They are nearly like bankrupt, I guess, in a sense. However, the leader of the group, Mira, not Mia, she finds the perfect property to plant on. It's somewhat abandoned, large property, very close to where a landslide has recently occurred. However, she's not the only one interested in this property. An eccentric American billionaire who works in the sort of drone industry is as well, and he kind of strikes up a deal with her because he has put an offer in on this property. He's like, I'm interested in this as well, and I'm going to be building my sort of doomsday home down here, but you can definitely plant. And so she decides to trust him and kind of presents this idea to the group. He's offering them a lot of money to be able to do this and welcomes them onto the property. There are so many things intertwined, so many people intertwined in this, so many like, oh, I don't even know what else to say because I don't want to spoil it. It starts off a little bit, some people say slow at first. I don't think it's that slow. It does kind of just go over a lot of these characters and their motivations, and I guess some people did find that a bit slow, but the last 150 pages of this book really go off, and especially the last 5 pages. I was like, how is this going to end? And I don't want to spoil anything, but I just didn't know. It was just like so much was going on. So I really loved this. There are just so many characters, just so many things happening, and just really like, yeah, who can trust who? Can we trust billionaires? Could he trust them? Like, what is going on? I feel like I'm being so unclear at this because I feel like anything I say will like spoil it past this point, and I'm just very excited by it. I think ideologies very much do get tested in this book. There's the character who's very against them working with this billionaire. He was one of the founding members of Birnam Wood, but he had gone away for a while, so I think he's very easy to dismiss. Yeah, there are a lot of like little conspiracies, a lot of things that remain a little unclear for a bit until they get a little more revealed towards the end. Yeah, highly recommend this one. It is a thrill. It was a thrill to read this. And I knew I was excited for this one when I first heard about it, when it was nominated for the prize, but I didn't expect I'd like it so much. It was really, really good, and I want to reread it just because I feel like I missed a couple things, honestly. So yeah, highly recommend this one. It's a longer book, and some people might say it's a little slow, but I really liked it. All right, thank you for tuning in. Those are the 7 books I read this month. I'm curious if you've read any good books this month, if you'd like to recommend any, because I do need some more books to read for November and December to get to my 100 book goal. I'm very bad at TBRs though. I'm definitely a mood reader, I've said this before, and so it's very hard for me to think of like a whole list of books I want to read. And I did make a partial one because there are some library books I have, another Giller Prize book that I want to read, but I couldn't think of a full 8 books to read for next month. So if you have a recommendation, I'm very happy. I'd be very down to hear that. Yeah, I hope things are going well. I hope you are having or have had a great Halloween weekend. And yeah, hope you're reading something good, and I will catch you in the next one.